Hi guys, in this video we're going to talk about the political and economic future of the EU in the wake of the coronavirus pandemic. Europe is in crisis. The coronavirus has brought Europe to the brink. Many policies thought unthinkable before the crisis have now been implemented, such as the controversial coronavirus stimulus package. And while many see this as leading to a more united Europe, do Europeans really feel that way? What will be the impact of the coronavirus on the popularity of eurosceptic populist parties in Europe? And what is the vision for the future of the European Union after this pandemic? This video is a Patreon request. To have a say and support the channel, consider becoming a Patreon. Anyway, let's get into it. For many, the corona crisis signaled the greatest challenge yet to European unity. At the start of the crisis, suddenly, fundamental principles of the European Union were being violated. Freedom of movement was replaced by border closures. Free trade was replaced by export bans on medical supplies. And when Italy desperately needed masks, it was China who stepped in, not the EU. And this has led many to speculate that the EU that will emerge post-coronavirus will have more nationalism, not less, and even more skepticism toward the EU. And in some ways, this is backed up by people's views of the EU coronavirus response. Italy was hardest hit by the coronavirus and was already facing stagnant economic growth and high debt levels before the crisis. Before the crisis, as many as 64% of Italians were pro-European. In March, that number dropped to just 49%. And it's unsurprising when you consider that 63% of Italians think that Europe has failed in its responsibility during the corona crisis. And this sentiment is felt across Europe. What's more, many in Europe feel that the EU has been irrelevant in this crisis, as many as 58% in France. Especially in the beginning of the crisis, most of the response was led by national governments, not the EU, and it was every man for himself. Now, to be fair, there have been individual acts of mutual assistance among the member states. For example, Germany took in coronavirus patients from other countries, while France donated over 1 million masks to Italy. But these are little more than symbolic gestures compared to the structural response that is needed. However, despite all this, we see that the majority of Europeans, 63%, want a greater role for EU cooperation in responding to the pandemic. So if the EU has been irrelevant in the initial healthcare response to the pandemic, surely it can be relevant for the economic response. In fact, much of the future of the EU depends on the economic recovery plan. Now, initially, the EU already implemented some measures that would help nations to save their economies. For example, relaxing the limits on deficit spending allowed governments to spend the necessary money to stimulate the economy, while removing restrictions on state aid allowed them to save businesses. But the biggest project that will have an impact on the future of the EU is the EU coronavirus stimulus package that was agreed on in July. And basically, this deal is the result of a lot of haggling, tough negotiation, and compromise. It basically entails this. Out of the 1.85 trillion euro stimulus package, 750 billion is for the coronavirus recovery fund. Of the 750 billion, 390 billion is made up of grants, while 360 billion is made up of loans. This money will be given primarily to the countries most in need. However, this money is tied to certain conditions based on how the money is spent, as well as being conditional on guaranteeing the rule of law and democracy. Now, that last bit is important because several EU countries, such as Hungary, have repeatedly violated the rule of law and European democratic norms. In Hungary, Viktor Orban used the coronavirus to allow himself to rule by decree, and this occurred against the backdrop of several constitutional changes that have weakened the independence of the judiciary and the media. At the same time, Viktor Orban funneled money from EU-sponsored contracts to his oligarch friends. Now, I go into more detail about this in my video about rising authoritarianism in Hungary, so make sure you check that out. But basically, if this is implemented properly, by tying the money to respect for democratic norms and no corruption, leaders like Viktor Orban, who threaten the stability of the EU, are severely constrained. But the bigger thing is this. The negotiations that led to this deal exposed the tensions and divisions within the EU. This 750 billion is the first time that money will be collectively borrowed by EU member states and not by individual nations. You see, before this, highly indebted countries like Greece and Italy would borrow money at very high interest rates because they form a higher credit risk, while richer northern countries like Germany and the Netherlands could borrow at low interest rates. By borrowing money together, the interest rates on these loans are somewhere in the middle. And what that effectively means is that the rich northern nations are paying for the poor southern countries. And this was the reason that countries such as the Netherlands initially opposed the deal. It was these countries that insisted that the money be conditional and that part of it be loans and not just grants. And so in this way, the tensions between the rich north and the poorer south are once again exposed. Now, for now, this is just a one-time thing. But what the rich north fears is that in the future, this will become a permanent feature. And so in many ways, this brings Europe closer to a so-called fiscal union and a federal Europe, where either through the sharing of debt or direct transfers of money, there is a permanent transfer of wealth from the rich north to the poor south. Now, this is a normal thing in a single country like America, where rich states like California pay for poor states like Alabama. But America has a common national identity, and that's something that's still somewhat lacking in Europe. And so this could produce tensions between southern countries who don't feel like the EU cares about them, and northern countries who feel like they're being forced to pay for the irresponsible economic policies of other countries. Coronavirus has led to member states pushing for a more united Europe, with more shared responsibilities. But if Europeans are not on board with this, this could lead to the resurgence of eurosceptic populist parties. Now, in the short term, populist parties have lost massive amounts of support, while mainstream parties, especially those in power, have gone up in the polls in a kind of rally around the flag effect. And there are several reasons for this. You see, populism relies on pitting the pure people against the corrupt elite. But this corona crisis, unlike the euro economic crisis, is not caused by the elite, and so the populist message doesn't resonate. Society has become more unified and less polarized as a result of the crisis. Demonizing minorities doesn't work, as we are all united and affected by this crisis. Also, immigration is way down, especially from non-European countries, and many illegal immigrants have gone home because there is no work. Thus, anti-immigration populists have nothing to campaign on. On top of that, whether it's Bolsonaro or Trump, populist leaders worldwide are failing, which sets a bad example for any potential populist voters at home. And so in some sense, there's a renewed faith in mainstream parties. But we shouldn't be fooled into thinking that this is the end of eurosceptic populist politics. The economic fallout of the corona crisis will increase populism in the medium term. The corona crisis showed the limits of European solidarity. When Europeans were asked who their country's greatest ally was during the corona crisis, almost no one said the EU. In fact, in Italy, 25% thought China had helped them the most, compared to just 4% who said the EU. This feeling of abandonment by the Union allows populists to blame the problems on the EU and contributes to eurosceptic sentiment. A recent poll shows that 67% of Italians believe being in the EU is a disadvantage to Italy, up from 47% in November 2018. So it would be a mistake to think that this crisis means the end of eurosceptic populism. But this simplistic division of Europeans into pro-EU federalists and eurosceptic nationalists is inaccurate and doesn't reflect how Europeans think, and thus cannot be used to predict future outcomes. Rather than these two opposing camps, research from the European Council on Foreign Relations shows that Europeans can be divided into basically three groups in terms of their vision for a post-coronavirus world. About 29% have a DIY, do-it-yourself attitude and believe in a world of insular nation-states going it alone. 15% believe in a new Cold War, with America leading the free world against China. But 42% are strategic sovereigntists who see the post-coronavirus world as a world with less globalization and a world divided into different blocks and regions. And this strategic sovereignty worldview is more nuanced than simply pro and anti-European. Strategic sovereigntists are more likely to believe in a more united Europe and more risk-sharing between states, but also believe in more protectionism, strong external borders, and producing medical supplies in Europe, not in China. These views reflect that of the majority of Europeans. You also see that attitudes towards both America and China are becoming more negative, with 48% having a more negative view of China compared to just 12% viewing China more positively. What this means is that more nationalist people realize that their nations can only be sovereign and have any influence on the world stage by acting as a bloc, while globalists realize that multilateral institutions like the UN and the World Health Organization aren't working as long as Trump, Putin, and Xi Jinping are in power. Thus, if the European countries are to remain relevant, they will have to act as a bloc caught between the United States and Russia and China. The Europe of the future will be a more protectionist Europe, with free trade and open borders within the Union, but protectionist tariffs and trade restrictions outside of it. It will be a Europe that seeks to reduce its dependence on China by, for example, producing medical equipment at home, and will also reduce its dependence on America by developing its own military. Contrary to popular belief, coronavirus is not the moment when Europe strives idealistically into a united federal Europe. People don't see Europe in terms of European identity or idealistic notions of a United States of Europe. Instead, European integration will be motivated by necessity, based on the need to band together against external threats. In this way, citizens are seeing the EU increasingly as a tool to empower the nation-state against foreign threats rather than as the end of the nation-state. Rather than individual nations losing their sovereignty by being bullied by China, America, and Russia, by banding together, they empower themselves and increase their sovereignty. And it's this argument, not lofty notions of Europeanism, that appeal to voters and will have to be used by European leaders in the post-coronavirus world. In short, by showing that it can assist national governments, the EU can improve its image in the eyes of the EU citizenry. At the same time, things like the coronavirus stimulus package expose the underlying tensions between North and South. Populism may be in retreat for now, but it is here to stay. And the future of the EU is one with less globalization, more protectionism, and nations acting as a bloc against external powers. To learn about the threats to the rule of law, corruption, and rising authoritarianism in Hungary, check out my video on Viktor Orban. Thank you to my Patreons for making this video possible. Consider becoming a Patreon to support more videos like this. Like, share, and subscribe, because this was my take.